Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in the wisdom of both Torah and of one another, which adds to the wisdom of Torah. What we will be doing is we're going to read through an English translation of our Torah portion. Then I'll share with you a little bit of a focus study on this week's portion, and then we'll open it up for our collective and collaborative conversation with people sharing their own thoughts and responses and reflections about this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is Kedoshim. It's in the Book of Leviticus. It begins with chapter 19, the Book of Leviticus, verse 1. If you'd like to go ahead and turn to that if you have a text. And then if you'd like to go ahead and unmute at this point, we can all share in reciting the blessing, giving thanks for this moment of study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu asher
Shanu b'mitzvotav v'anu la'asok v'divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for the opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. I'll share with you the opening couple of verses, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity, if they'd like to do so, to read some verses, and then we'll have our discussion. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, 'You shall be holy, for I, Adonai, your God, am holy.'" Richard, would you like to read a little bit at verse 3?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. "You shall each revere her mother and his father, and keep my Sabbaths. I, the Lord, am your God. Do not turn to idols or make molten gods for yourself. I, the Lord, am your God. When you sacrifice an offering of well-being to the Lord, sacrifice it that it may be accepted on your behalf. It shall be eaten on the day you sacrifice it or on the day following, but what is left by the third day must be consumed in fire. If it should be eaten on the third day, it is an offensive thing. It will not be acceptable. And he who eats of it shall bear his guilt, for he has profaned what is sacred to the Lord. That person shall be cut off from his kin."
Thank you, Richard. And Margot, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 9?
Yeah, "When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, the Lord, am your God."
Thank you so much, Margot. And June, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 11?
Rabbi, "Ye shall not steal, neither shall ye deal falsely, nor lie one to another. And ye shall not swear by my name falsely, so that thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. Thou shalt not oppress thy neighbor, nor rob him. The wages of a hired servant shall not abide with thee all night until the morning. Thou shalt not curse the deaf, nor put a stumbling block before the blind, but thou shalt fear thy God. I am the Lord. Ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment. Thou shalt not respect the person of the poor, nor favor the person of the mighty, but in righteousness shalt thou judge thy neighbor. Thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among thy people, neither shalt thou stand idly by the blood of thy neighbor. I am the Lord."
Thank you so much. And Dave, would you like to continue?
Yes. Where are we now?
17.
17. "You shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. Reprove your kin, but incur no guilt on their account. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against members of your people. Love your fellow Israelite as yourself. I am Adonai. You shall observe my laws. You shall not let your cattle mate with a different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed. You shall not put on cloth from a mixture of two kinds of material.
Thank you so much. And Robert, would you like to continue there at verse 20 for a little bit?
Yes, thank you. And whosoever lieth carnally with a woman that is a bondmaid, betrothed to a husband, and not at all redeemed, nor freedom given her, she shall be scourged. They shall not be put to death, because she was not free. And he shall bring his trespass offering unto the Lord, unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, even a ram for a trespass offering. And the priest shall make an atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering before the Lord for his sin which he hath done, and the sin which he hath done shall be forgiven him.
Thank you, Robert. And Paul, would you like to read a little bit at verse 23?
Thank you, Rabbi. When you shall come to the land and you shall plant any food tree, you shall treat its fruit as forbidden. For 3 years they shall be forbidden to you, and they shall not be eaten. In the 4th year, all its fruits shall be sanctified to Lord Hashem. And the 5th year, you may eat this fruit, so that it will increase its crop for you. I am Hashem your God. You shall not eat over the blood. You shall not indulge in sorcery, and you shall not believe in lucky times. You shall not round off the edge of your scalp, and you shall not destroy the edge of your beard. You shall not make a cut in your flesh for the dead, and a tattoo shall you not place upon yourselves. I am Hashem.
Thank you so much. Michael, would you like to do any reading this evening? If you'd like to, you need to go take yourself off mute. Michael, would you like to do any reading for this evening?
I'm sorry, I was muted. I don't have the Chumash in front of me. I
Okay.
didn't realize I needed it.
That's
So
fine.
next time, I'll
That'd
be
be
more
lovely, Michael.
prepared.
That's lovely, Michael. Thank you so much. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. And Alan, would you like to do some reading there at verse 29?
Yeah, thank you. Do not degrade your daughter and make her a harlot, lest the land fall into harlotry and the land be filled with depravity. You shall keep my Sabbaths and venerate my sanctuary. I am the Eternal. Do not turn to ghosts, and do not inquire of familiar spirits to be defiled by them. I, the Lord, am your God. You shall rise before the aged and show deference to old. You shall fear your God. I am the Eternal.
Thank you so much, Al. Am I right that Rita, you don't care to read? Is that right?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rabbi. Thank you.
It's so lovely to see you both. So lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And Jim, would you like to read a little bit there, verse 33?
Thank you, Rabbi. When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not wrong him. The stranger who resides with you shall be with you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am Adonai, your God. You shall not falsify measures of length, weight, or capacity. You shall have an honest balance, honest weights, an honest ephah, and an honest hin. I, Adonai, am your God who freed you from the land of Egypt. You shall faithfully observe all my laws and all my rules. I am Adonai.
Thank you so much. And Gary, would you like to read beginning at the start of chapter 20?
And the Eternal One spoke to Moses, say further to the Israelite people. Anyone among the Israelites or among the strangers residing in Israel who gives any offspring to Moloch shall be put to death. The people of the land shall pelt the person with stones, and I will set my face against that person whom I will cut off from among the people for having given offspring to Moloch and so defiled my sanctuary and profaned my holy name. And if the people of the land should shut their eyes to that person's giving offspring to Moloch and should not put the person to death, I myself will set my face against that person's kin as well. And I will cut off from among their people both that person and all who follow in going astray after Moloch. And if any person turns to ghosts and familiar spirits and goes astray after them, I will set my face against that person whom I will cut off from among the people.
Thank you, Gary. And Justin, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 7?
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. You shall sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. You shall observe my statutes and fulfill them. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. For any man who curses his father or his mother shall be put to death. He has cursed his father or his mother. His blood is upon himself. But a man who commits adultery with another man's wife, committing adultery with the wife of his fellow, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. And a man who lies with his father's wife has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon themselves. And a man who lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have committed a depravity. Their blood is upon themselves. And a man who lies with a male, as one would lie with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon themselves. And a man who takes a woman and her mother, it is evil counsel. They shall burn him and them in fire, and there shall be no evil counsel in your midst. And a man who lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. You shall kill the animal. And a woman who comes close to any animal so that it will mate with her, you shall kill the woman and the animal. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon themselves.
Thank you, Justin. That's very profound. Thank you. And Robin, if you'd like to read a little bit beginning verse 17.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. If a man marries his sister, the daughter of either his father or his mother, so that he sees her nakedness and she sees his nakedness, it is a disgrace. They shall be excommunicated in the sight of their kinsfolk. He has uncovered the nakedness of his sister. He shall bear the guilt. If a man lies with a woman during her menstrual condition and uncovers her nakedness, he has laid bare her flow, and she has exposed her blood flow. Both of them shall be cut off from among other people. You males shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister or of your father's sister, for that is laying bare one's own flesh. They shall bear their guilt. If a man lies with his uncle's wife, it is his uncle's nakedness that he has uncovered. They shall bear their guilt. They shall die childless. If a man marries the wife of his brother, it is indecency. It is the nakedness of his brother that he has uncovered. They shall remain childless.
Thank you so much, Robin. Hello, Catherine. Would you like to read a little bit at chapter 20, verse 22?
Yes. Thank you, Rabbi. You shall faithfully observe all my laws and all my regulations, lest the land
to which I bring you to settle on spew you out. You shall not follow the practices of the nation that I am driving out before you, but it is because they did all these things that I abhorred them, and said to you, you shall possess their land, for I will give it to you to possess, a land flowing with milk and honey. I, the Lord, am your God, who has set you apart from other peoples. So you shall set apart the clean beast from the unclean bird from the clean. You shall not draw abomination upon yourselves through beast or bird or anything with which the ground is alive, which I have set apart for you to treat it as the Adonai am holy, and I have set you apart from other peoples to be mine.
Why don't you go ahead and read that last verse, and that would be the
Okay.
conclusion.
Okay. A man or a woman who has a ghost or a familiar spirit shall be put to death. They shall be pelted with stones. Their blood guilt shall be upon them.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everyone. That's our Torah portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a little bit of a focus study. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out now. And then at the conclusion of that, we'll open it up for our collective and collaborative conversation about this week's Torah portion, with us, everyone having an opportunity to share their thoughts, reflections, and responses to this week's portion. Just want to take, again, a step back and look at the book of Leviticus as a whole before we focus on this week's Torah portion. For many, many, many years, indeed for many decades, when I would read the book of Leviticus, I would see it as kind of a piece of archaic literature that had no relevancy to life today, that it was addressed to a very exclusive subset of the Jewish people, that the Levites, that it was bereft of any of the grand narrative that the remaining 4 books of Torah are about. And so it would seem almost as if it were a poor diversion from the real journey that we're on, which is the journey of understanding creation and those opportunities, and understanding the Exodus and the journey towards the promised land. It is as if the book of Leviticus just immediately kind of drops into the middle of that wonderful, exciting story with a set of rules, primarily having to do with the sacrificial rites, and addressed to a very narrow subset of the Jewish people. This year, I've been reading it very differently. It has struck me very differently. And it has struck me as a body of literature that is quite intentionally taking a break from the excitement of the journey that the Israelite people are on. And it is intentionally interrupting that narrative flow with a set of practices designed to help us achieve fulfillment as human beings. I guess the way I've been thinking about it is to be able to be freed from whatever constraints one is under doesn't make one free. It just makes one not captive. To be free in this, what this storyline is telling us, is to be free means to become a more developed and responsible human being that is mutually accountable to other human beings. So to merely be let out of jail, to merely have one unchained, does not make one a free person. In fact, it can make one a rather unfree and chaotic person. So I've seen this year, I've been reading the book of Leviticus as really trying to help us continue that journey by acknowledging that we have weaknesses, we have negative urges, we have all kinds of distractions in our hearts and our minds that keep us from really fulfilling ourselves and developing ourselves more fully as what should be free human beings. And curiously enough, although it is denominated as Leviticus, meaning it seems to be directed towards the Levites and their responsibilities as the designated religious leaders of the Israelite people. I want to suggest that I'm reading it this year in a way that I see a very subversive element within it, that it is really directed towards all of us. And I think we'll see that particularly as we go through a study of this week's Torah portion. So I've entitled this week's Torah portion, The Fruit of the Fifth Year. At the very top is a beautiful painting by Paul Cézanne, which we'll discuss in some detail in the course of our study. And I'd like to focus on some verses that we see in chapter 19, and that's number 1 on your study sheet. And it's these verses. When you enter the land and plant any tree for food, you shall regard its fruit as forbidden. 3 years it shall be forbidden for you, not to be eaten. In the 4th year, all its fruit shall be set aside, Kodesh, for jubilation to Adonai. And in the 5th year, you may eat its fruit, that it may yield more richly to you its increase. I am Adonai, your God. Could you close the door? So here we have this prescription that once we've entered into the land and we plant trees and they bear fruit, that we're not supposed to eat the fruit for the first 3 years of its growth. And then on the 4th year, we take the fruit and it's supposed to be set aside. The word here, kadosh, is to be set aside, sanctified, dedicated, and dedicated for giving thanks to God. And the way that practice developed is that fruit was to be taken to ultimately to Jerusalem, where it was to be presented and offered up in thanks to God. In the 5th year, the 5th year of the fruit's growth, of the growth of fruit, that is available to everyone to eat anywhere. So we're going to explore this notion about these first 3 and then the 4th year and then the 5th year of the growth of fruit on trees. So I noted that the word that's used for the 4th year of the fruit as being set aside, Kodesh, and which can be translated as holy, that word in its root is first used in the story of creation. And it's here in chapter 2, verse 3. God blessed the 7th day and consecrated it, Vayikadesh, because on it God ceased from all the work of creation that God had done. So here we are. This is the first time this word kadosh is used, and it's used not as an adjective. The first time it appears in the Jewish Bible is used as a verb. And the verb here is rendered as consecrated, meaning set aside. And something that is set aside is something that is considered to be dedicated for a very special purpose. God blessed the 7th day and consecrated the 7th day, signified that it was a special holy day, because that's when God had ceased work on it. So we're going to explore this notion about holiness and how that applies to the fruits that we've just read about and what that might mean in our own lives as well. So we noted that there are these 4 years of growth of fruit and the way that they are each to be treated. with the fifth being somewhat rather different. So these 4 years of growth in Jewish spirituality are also associated with what's known as 4 different worlds that constitute the universe. And I've provided those in number 3. Asiyah, which means action, Yitzirah, which means formation, Riyah, which means creation, and Atzilut, which means emanation. And in terms of the human dimension of existence, all of these worlds that constitute the whole universe, all of these worlds exist within us, and they get reflected this way. Asiyah, the world of action, refers to our physical lives. Yitzirah, that of formation, relates to our emotional lives. Bria, that of creation, refers to our intellectual lives. And Atzilut, emanation, that refers to our spiritual life. And so the spiritual life is what would normally be considered the holy aspect of our life. That's where we are most attached to God, so to speak. And the other aspects of our lives, the first 3, the physical, the emotional, the intellectual, in this framework of thinking, those first 3 dimensions are still so fraught with distractions and imperfections, both in our physical activity, in our emotional lives, in our intellectual, our thinking lives. They can be, in a sense, so impure because of different kinds of urges and thoughts and misdirections and so forth. And so that's why there is this connection between those first 3 years and the first 3 years of the fruit, which is that the fruit is not yet ready to be dedicated to God. It's the 4th year of fruit that is to be dedicated to God, and that is reflected in this scenario of Atzilut, of where there's this flow of connection between God and us. It is at the spiritual level where we feel so connected to God. We're able to transcend these other levels of physical, emotional, and intellectual life. We're going to explore how there's a way in which other material within Jewish tradition kind of subverts that notion of holiness as being the highest form of expression. We have this notion from the Talmud: one who engages solely in the study of Torah, declares Rav Huna, is one who has no God. And that might be, it seems like a shocking statement. You'd think that study of Torah is to be the highest activity that we can engage in, to immerse ourselves in this body of wisdom, to study what we've been instructed to live, how to live in order to live a holy life. And yet the Talmud is pointing out that if that's all that you do, then you're not really connecting with God. So we're going to follow that a little bit. If you turn over, but by kind of exploring a story by the founder of the Hasidic movement, the Baal Shem Tov. Okay. So the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, early in his teaching and early in his reaching out to other human beings to bring them closer to God, to bring them closer to their own hearts, to be able to experience joy and celebration in life. Early in that career, he would wander around and he would just talk to people and ask them, he'd say, how is your life? How's your business? How's your health? He would ask them about very material things in their life. And then he would normally get expressions of, he would be so overjoyed when he'd get expressions from people saying, oh, I'm so glad to be able to be with my family. I'm so glad that I have food to eat. I'm so glad that I'm healthy enough to be able to meet with you and talk with you. And then he went to a village. There he encountered a great sage, a great wise person who spent all day studying Torah. In fact, this sage was so engaged in the study of Torah that he ignored his own physical well-being. And in fact, he would eat virtually nothing all day long. And then after evening services, he would have a little bit of bread and water, and that was it. And so the Baal Shem Tov went into this man's study and said, how are you? How are you feeling? How's your health? And the sage didn't understand at all why someone would be talking to him about such mundane things when there's Torah to be studied. And the more that the Baal Shem Tov asked him these questions about his own physical well-being, the more irritated the sage became, until the sage said, "Get out of here! Get out of my study! You're distracting me from the study of Torah." And then the Baal Shem Tov turned to him and said, "Why do you not give God God's livelihood?" To which the sage then became completely confounded, had no idea what the Baal Shem Tov was saying. And the Baal Shem Tov explained to him that we have these basic physical needs, and we're provided ways to sustain these basic physical needs, and that God is to be found and celebrated in the most mundane of things, that which gives us life, that which sustains us, and that which allows us to be present and healthy and well in this world. So it was a lesson that these mundane aspects of life, money, work, food, these are not distractions from having an attachment to God. Rather, if we look at them the right way, we can sanctify them as an instrument for celebrating life and celebrating the source of all life. So the sage had only been concerned with study and had not been concerned with these fundamental aspects. He saw eating only as a way to survive, rather than seeing them as an avenue for sanctifying the physical and thereby giving praise to God. The larger story about this approach and this notion of the Baal Shem Tov is that our mission is not for us to ascend and dwell in the upper regions. Our mission is to make this dimension one where God can dwell in the lower worlds. We're not to leave behind the lower world and dwell in the upper worlds. Rather, we're to make this lower world a place where God can dwell. So I want to connect that with what we're reading in our week's Torah portion, and then we'll look a bit at the painting. In the verses that we looked at from our Torah portion, the fourth year, the first 3 years, the fruit's not ready. It's not ripe enough. It hasn't developed enough to be able to offer up to God. The fourth year, the fruit is ready. It has matured. It has reached a level of perfection that we can now dedicate it to God. And the practice is to take it to Jerusalem and then to offer it up. It is kadosh. It is holy. But it is, if you will, it is something that is set aside and isolated from the rest of daily life and from the rest of the people. This year is when the fruit is able to be eaten anywhere, including outside the walls of Jerusalem. And it can be eaten by anyone, not just by the priests. And that is, in this tradition, that's the fruit that's considered to be the most precious. When we can go beyond that which has been isolated and insulated into something that everyone can share it. So Paul Cézanne was an artist born, I believe, in 1839, lived till 1906. And he was an artist who was several years younger than the artists who became known as the Impressionists. He studied with them. He actually exhibited initially with them, but he wanted to go beyond what the Impressionists were doing. He wanted to go beyond what was known then as the capturing the fleeting moment. He wanted something more substantial. He wanted to be able to paint something that would be enduring and lasting. And so Paul Cézanne, his approach, which we'll talk about in a moment, his approach launched a whole new approach to art. He painted a lot of still life. He painted, I believe, over 170 still life works. And he took very simple, basic objects: apple, pomegranate, some grapes, some other fruits. And instead of trying to create this fleeting moment, which is what the Impressionists had done, he worked more inside of his studio than outside where the Impressionists had worked. And instead of these impressionistic splashes of color and of imagery, he instead employed very intentional strokes to create and give depth and shape to the subjects that he was interested in. He employed, instead of the quick brush strokes of the Impressionists, he used what were called very constructive strokes. And he created gave highly geometric design and dimension to the pieces that he was interested in. If you look at the painting that's on the study sheet entitled "The Basket of Apples," you can see what he is doing here that is so different from the artists that had come before him. First of all, the perspective here is very, very different. What he has done, the traditional form of perspective in the classical period of art became known as the single point perspective, where everything kind of focused in on a single point in a painting. Here, he has allowed multiple perspectives, and you don't know where your eye should stop and start. You might look at the basket, the edge of the basket in the upper left-hand corner, and then you might focus on these cakes that are piled in a geometric form on the plate. And then your eyes might shift to the bottle of wine in the middle, and then they might focus on the pull of the linen cloth in the middle, and then they might focus on one or more or many of the different apples that are spread on the table. The perspective is constantly changing as one looks at this painting. It is not forced to be looking at any one point in the painting. And then if you notice the table, there's something odd about the table. It does not appear as if you follow the line of the edge of the table in the bottom right-hand corner and then look at it in the bottom left-hand corner, it doesn't appear as if they're in alignment. There's something out of alignment with the line of the table. So what Cézanne has done here is he has allowed us to look at different objects from different points of view throughout our viewing of it. And he's revealing to us different planes of dimension. And he's also revealing that there's no stability, if you will, within the perspective itself. The bottle of wine seems to be leaning. We're wondering, what is it that allows this basket to be tilted the way it is? Why do not Why do some of the apples not continue to fall off the table? Why is it that the table seems to be skewed in terms of its perspective? And I think he's doing this in order to reveal to us that to be able to focus on each object independent from the image as a whole, to spend time with each object. And then what becomes significant is each object's relationship to each other object that's within the painting itself. And to also begin to reveal to us that there are multiple realities of existence, if you will, occurring at any one time. The bottle has its own perspective, its own axis of existence, if you will, that doesn't seem to be in accord with other objects within the painting itself. The edge of the table, the one on the right seems to have a reality and a dimension that's not necessarily in alignment and in accord with the dimension of the line of the table on the left-hand side. This notion of exploring possible dimensions occurring, all different ones all at the same time, ultimately is what gives rise to cubism. And indeed, it was Picasso and Braque and other cubists who said that Cézanne was the father of us all. And so Cézanne opens up an approach to perspective and an approach to kind of focusing on individual aspects within a picture that begins to inform what now is known as modern art, something that transcends the need to replicate the reality of an object and instead to begin to explore the dimension of an object. So he said, I will astonish Paris with an apple. And what he meant by that was, well, you can go to a store, you can go out into the field and you can find an apple, which can be very beautiful. What Cézanne was saying was, I'm going to show them an apple based upon what I have experienced in terms of that apple, what I see at that apple, what I present to you in the nature of that apple. It's not merely the intrinsic characteristics of the apple itself that's beautiful. It's what Cézanne has seen there and what he's presented to us. It is the artist's hand creating an apple that he says will astonish the people of Paris. I want to suggest that what our Torah portion is hinting at is that it is one thing to have something that is beautiful, that can be set aside, that can be considered special. But really the most precious thing is when we offer something of our own out beyond the insulation of these body of set of rules, if you will. When we offer it up for everyone. And so in that sense, there's something quite subversive about this entire book of Leviticus that's being revealed here and in this portion, Kedoshim, holiness. It's revealing, perhaps in a very subtle way, that you may think that this is a book dedicated to a very narrow subset of the Israelite people, focusing on a very narrow set of practices which only the priests can conduct. But hidden within here, I think, is a message that to be truly free, to create a truly free community, means that all of us need to find and unleash and share our creativity with one another. So with that, I'd love to open it up and see what else you saw in this week's Torah portion of Kedoshim, If you'd like to raise your hand, I'd love to call upon you. Paul, please. Go ahead and unmute, Paul. Go ahead.
Since nobody else is volunteering and I'm an expert in the world of mundane, I want to point out that I was watching the Israeli channel 24, which did essentially what the Cezanne did just the other day, where they did a panning thing, and it was on the it was the Remembrance Day. And what they did was they panned through different parts of Israel, showing at the moment when the sirens went off, they panned through all the different cities, different locations. But then the part that caught me was like you paid your 0.4 and 0.5, where basically when it came to this very religious area, you had these people walking around completely ignoring the event, basically. And so it's a panning where you kind of get a lot of different messages from on different parts. And it's just a little bit like Cezanne. If you pan through everything, you're going to see some stuff that number 4 and number 5 come out with.
So here's something what you got me thinking about, and then we'll get to Stephen Sherry and Catherine and others and Mark. There is a wonderful collection of artwork dealing with the 4 children that we read about in the Passover Haggadah. And one of the early ones that was made by an early Zionist had 4 different characters representing 4 different children. And the one that didn't seem to know, the one that doesn't even know how to ask a question was represented by an obviously very religious Jewish person. And the wise one was a very muscular figure with sleeves rolled up and ready to go work in the fields. Because in the early Zionist scenario, those who were, as the Baal Shem Tov was pointing out, those who spent all their time in study were worthless. They in terms of creating a state. And it was those who were willing to farm and run the tractors and plant the fields and plant the trees and drain the swamps. Those were the ones who were truly the wise ones and the great heroes. So it's very interesting in terms of the state of Israel, how those different archetypes, if you will, have played out. So thanks for pointing that out. Steve and Sherry, and then Catherine, and then Mark.
On a different level, I was thinking about Saint Exupery's Little Prince, and the little boy, is asking the man, he said, "Don't bother me, son. I'm calculating numbers of consequence." And the little boy's asking, "Well, what are you using the numbers for? Where is this taking us?" Asking all of these deep philosophical questions. And his stock answer was, "Don't bother me, son. I'm calculating numbers of consequence or significance," the way it was. And it just seemed to me to be a sort of along the same vein. And that was my thought on that.
So tell me a little bit more about the numbers and go ahead, tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, the story is, if I remember right, and I read up years ago, he's an accountant. And so, it's an accountant that's all involved in his numbers, but his numbers are divorced from anything that's meaningful to anybody else. The numbers he might be accounting might mean the difference between whether somebody has enough food to eat, or can pay their rent, or is able to pay taxes, or whatever it is that they need the money for. And he's just so focused in on the money, the figures, the act of accounting the numbers, that he's not able to answer basic questions. He's just off in his own universe.
Right. So when we become so too detached in our own focused area, when we become too detached from the world around us, becomes more harmful than helpful, perhaps. Is that?
In this case, the child is the wise one because he wants to know. And
Yes,
the accountant is the child in the mind has no concept of answering this and explaining and understanding what the world's about. It's just a flip of the coin presented. That's how I see it.
That's in a flip in the way that the archetypes of that early Zionist presentation of the four sons. Thank you. But so let me call upon Catherine, and then we'll get to Mark Thompson and Robert. Go ahead, Catherine. Go ahead and unmute and share with us.
Okay. Yeah, this it just struck me that this parshat is about restraint on the horizon of abundance. Given what you were pointing out in that section of the parshat with the waiting for the 5th year. And looking at the painting, there's a certain abundance, but there's also a very precarious equilibrium there. And the different planes contribute to that precariousness of the equilibrium. And so I had to wonder what would happen if we did take one of those apples from the table. It would upset the equilibrium.
Catherine, you've introduced a whole several different dimensions to our discussion. I really appreciate it. The notion of restraint. So one can think about, these are people heading towards the promised land, and maybe they are full of enthusiasm. And how many of us, when we're embarked upon a project, we just charge right into it? And sometimes it requires a level of restraint in order to really reach a sense of accomplishment, rather than just immediately going with our urges. And so maybe that's also another message that's woven in here, the need to just don't immediately pick the first fruits. Spend some time with your project. Don't immediately go with your first draft. Whatever the first take, whatever it is you want to characterize. Spend some time on it. Reflect some. Be more restrained, and nurture your work a little bit more in order to reach a real sense of fulfillment. Thank you very much for introducing that notion. Thank you. And Mark Thompson.
Yes. I wanted to talk a little bit about the quote with regard to one who studies Torah solely is really not living a complete life. And it bothered me a little bit because in the past, we've talked about Torah as being much more all-encompassing, as opposed to being something that is sort of specifically relegated to a thing in particular, like accounting. And I've been reading a little bit more about going way into the past, Ha'azinu. If you recall, we talked about how Ha'azinu is basically, it's a poem, but it's also a song, and it's a recapitulation of our ongoing struggle to become our best selves. And so it seems to me that it's not necessary to limit ourselves with Torah. I think if we look at it the right way, we can expand ourselves with it, and it doesn't have to be limiting. Although I do understand the notion that you don't want to be solely involved with it, because that does take you away from the real world. That's really what I had to say. Thanks.
Beautiful. So there are other places in the Talmud where the notion of what is Torah becomes greatly expanded beyond just studying. So there's a story that's told about a disciple of a particular rabbi who snuck into the rabbi's home and crawled under his bed and wanted to be there when the rabbi and his wife had intimacy. And then the rabbi looks under the bed and sees his student there and says, "What are you doing here?" And the student says, "Well, this is Torah too." Right. Okay. Thank you very much. So let me call upon Robert, and then I think, Michael, maybe you had your hand up, so let me call on Robert first. Go ahead. Let me call on Robert first.
Thank you so much. I always enjoy these evenings. You know, I was also thinking of the same thing that Mark mentioned, the story of the sage. And I'm reminded how nature is such a great teacher. And I'm thinking of a bird at flight. And if we think of an individual or humankind as a bird flying, we need both the material and the spiritual to fly, to maneuver. Without both, we're stuck in the mire. The other thing that comes to my mind is the Red Sea and the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea has water flowing in it, which is a source of life. So we can look at Torah or whatever our scripture is. Flowing in, and I think some of us have been to the Dead Sea, but there's no life. But the Red Sea, water flows in and flows out, is filled with life. And I think that, again, is the balance. And that's what's happening tonight. So, for example, you've done your study, you have spent time preparing, but it didn't stay with you. You shared it with us. So I think that's an example of that as well. I really enjoyed that story.
So Robert, I don't know if you're aware, but there is that story about the Dead Sea within Jewish literature, describing it as being a Dead Sea because all it does is it receives waters from above. And
I didn't know that.
Yes, and to the extent there's not an exchange, then that's what makes it dead. And so thank you for kind of intuitively, going there. Thank you. Michael, would you like to share some thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know if it's that different from the previous two speakers, but what struck me was the number 4, one who engages solely in the study of Torah is one who has no God. To me, the essence of our religion is one of practicality and living in a real world and bringing holiness to our actual lives rather than just sitting in a library and studying and having all these ideas without actually practice. So that's what that brought to me. And another thought, which I think I got it from one of the Rabbi Sachs covenants that I read, but I'm not sure where it came from, was the preceding chapters of the Chumash here all dealt with basically the priests, and here we've got the average Israelite Jew, rules for them to do, and they are also as holy as the priests. So it's sort of a move from only them, only the priests, to all of Israel is, all of us are priests, and we're priests in our daily lives and how we conduct ourselves. And of course, not to put an object in front of a blind person and the other things, I think, are examples of how we're supposed to live our lives to be holy.
So, Michael, it's very beautiful. The Book of Leviticus lies at the very center of the 5 books of Moses. And at the very center of the Book of Leviticus is our Parshat Kedoshim, which is, as you pointed out, is directed at all of us, with the very basic message about to love others, And that's at the very heart of this message. So one can say the very heart of Torah is a message that's directed at all of us to love one another, to look out for one another, to care for one another, and to aid one another. And beautifully put, that is indeed our mission. And when we do that, when we share our harvests with one another, when we just don't consecrate it, dedicated it, seclude it, separated away, when we share, that's when we have the greatest possibility of not only bringing God into dwelling within this dimension, but further increasing, as the verse itself says, further increasing our own harvest and well-being in this world. And so with that, I want to thank each and every one of you for participating in this sharing of the fruits of your labors and your harvest and of your creativity, and to making this a place full of blessings and well-being. There is indeed perhaps something of value beyond even that which is called holy, and that which is what we call the fruit of the fifth year. Thank you all so much for coming together. Look forward to our regathering next time. God bless you all and be well. Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to Rabbi and everyone else.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah.